Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have Leon Gordon, who is the CEO and founder of Onyx Data. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Of course, thank you so much for taking the time. Tell us a little bit about Onyx Data. What do you guys do? What kind of companies do you guys work with?
Oh, absolutely. So we are a data and AI consultancy that partners with organizations to help them leverage emerging technologies, really focused on driving value, new revenue streams, and efficiencies. We focus solely on Microsoft technologies, and we have experts in the space, both encompassing Microsoft MVPs. So it means we don't just say that we're experts. Microsoft also deems us as experts. And really, we focus on forward-thinking organizations that want to really prove out bleeding edge technology, but also actually have a tangible output at the end of it that drives value across the organization.
Very cool. And is there a particular vertical that you guys work with outside of the Microsoft component being one of the criteria?
Interestingly, that there isn't. We tend to find, and we're probably the anomaly here, because we do see most of our competitors and other organizations that really niche down, and we have done this. We've worked with the maritime industry, for example. But really, we find that a lot of organizations come to us because data is abundant. We all know this. AI is now seen as an emerging technology. I'm sure we'll go into that in a bit more detail later. But really, organizations come to us because they just want to drive value. They're tired of projects that either never reach fruition or they become money pits, for lack of a better term, and they really come to us to drive that value. So with that in mind, we tend to at least discuss projects, see how we can support them, and that means that we tend to be at the moment industry agnostic.
Fair enough. Very cool. So I would like to dive into a little bit more about your background, how you got into becoming a data consultant in the first place. Just kind of going through, your LinkedIn, can see like a lot of different earlier parts of your career that, came from marketing. You're also a footballer in the previous life, an athlete of some sort. And then you got into being a developer and then doing more of the data consultancy stuff. So how did that evolution happen? I know a lot of people who end up becoming developers. Some of them have like stories where, their dad bought them their computer in the garage and they worked off of that. And that was the very beginning. Some did it out of like survival and necessity to upskill themselves at different parts. Kind of where did that happen for you?
Oh, how long have you got? So I'll try to keep it as short as possible because, as you mentioned, my career is not the usual, shall we say, for the industry. So I've always had an affinity with technology, computing, and developing. That there's no shadow of a doubt around that. Similar to some of the participants you've had on this podcast previously, absolutely. My single mother did buy me a 286. For those that are old enough to know what that is, it's a very antiquated processor. So we're going back some way here. Now, my evolution path was actually, I'm sure as many people in technology are, I used to be a big gamer. I still wish I was, but time doesn't allow that anymore. Now, with a 286, it's very difficult to get a game to run on that, especially when it's floppy disk based, the RAM limitations, the hard drive limitations. So what this means is that you have to become very adept at understanding hardware and swapping in and out components. And that's what really drove the hardware aspect and really diving deep into technology. As you mentioned, fortunately or unfortunately for me, I was a pretty good footballer, or soccer for those that are listening internationally. And as I'm sat here in front of you today, it's quite clear that I didn't quite make it. So unfortunately, I did what many people dream of, and that's leave in the UK what would be secondary school and go directly into a football scholarship and then pursue that into a pro contract, which meant that I didn't go down the traditional university route, which makes me very different to everybody else, all of my peers and colleagues within the industry. So that meant that when I left that career path, I had to really start again. And as you've mentioned, I went into various roles in marketing, etc., and then found a temporary role doing data entry. So for those of you familiar with the data
Yeah.
career path, it's very much the bottom end of the spectrum, and it was a temporary contract. Now, again, without going into too much detail of how everything evolved, I was able to show some pretty good skills during that temporary role, which led them to take a punt on me to then join their IT team. So I had to self-teach and learn on the job SQL, Python, really looking at the engineering aspects of data, then modeling that data in the traditional data warehouse ecosystem, looking at in what those days we referred to as cubes. It's probably more of the semantic model in today's day and age, before moving on to artificial intelligence from that perspective.
Got it. I feel like that was it was a very shortcutted answer from like, I was put into this situation to self-teach and self-learn, and all of a sudden we're 10 seconds later talking about AI. But I feel like there's probably like in that time period from like self-taught, self-learning, I don't know many people that can have the discipline to go through that in real time in a real role, right? And do it in that capacity. What do you feel like inherent to yourself made you be able to do that? Obviously, you had some experience and had a love for technology in your younger years outside of your athletic career. So there's already that curiosity. But is there anything like particularly you feel like from a personal level with just like maybe your curiosity, maybe your personality type that allowed you to do that in a way that was maybe non-conventional? But like I feel like you would have to, there has to be a certain level of discipline and determination to accomplish that, in addition to having like that curiosity and that willpower to kind of to go down the rabbit hole on your own.
Absolutely. And I think that's an amazing question there, Chris. So for me, I kind of put it down to competitiveness, drive, hard work. A good word, sorry, is relentless, and really that entrepreneur spirit. So I guess what really drove me is curiosity. Yes, you have to be curious in this industry. And then to drive value as well. So what I was doing was, obviously I was working in these roles and going down a traditional career path. But also I had to look outside of those roles to what's next. What do I need to achieve personally, or learn or drive value in the business to then move to the next phase. And so everything became a bit of life's always a challenge. That goes without saying, but I think it's more of a jigsaw puzzle. I tend to find in my personality that when I reach the next step, it's okay, where's next? How do we get to what's next? Which is, I think it's a fantastic trait to have, but also I'll be the first to say it's definitely a negative as well, because it means you never stop to smell the roses, shall we say, or to celebrate.
Fair enough. Um, and so as you mentioned though, you went from there to then doing a lot of kind of like freelance work, consultancy work. Um, at what point do you feel like you started to separate yourself from, being a cog in the wheel of an organization to then wanting to become somebody that's more like this third party looking in as like a consultant or an expert in this field? Because I think like that's a lot of the times when we have this conversation on the show, there's a lot of like personal doubt. There's a sense of, imposter syndrome to a certain degree. And everybody has their own way of like how they overcome some of those insecurities. Even though, they probably do have the skill set that it required to do those things, but the confidence level to say it with authority, I think, is the learning process for each individual to go through before they level up, I think, just in their own mind to a certain degree, I feel like.
Absolutely. And I was one of these people myself. I can only pull it into the context of how I achieved it. And one of the reasons that I did upskill, and I did spend so many times going to networking events, spending nights reading, it was books in my day as opposed to YouTube and Udemy and all these other kind of platforms. But it was with that goal. So my kind of thought process around people that had the MVP badge and people that were consultants is that they were experts across, and data and AI are huge fields. Okay, so I won't beat around the bush. I obviously attempted to learn and gain as much knowledge and experience in all of those fields as possible, which made me a very well-rounded developer and understanding the domain in a lot more detail. So for me, it was very beneficial. But I actually was working in a role, and I met other people that were consulting on that role. And they kept saying to me, Leon, why are you working for this company? You're clearly good enough technically. The work you do, like you should be out there doing it. And I still said, well, I don't think I know enough just yet. Let's give it some more time. Anyway, eventually they kind of tipped my hand, so to speak, and I went for it. I had in the UK we have probation periods. I'm sure it's similar in other countries and organizations as well. And literally the week before my probation period was going to end, I successfully got my first freelance gig and left. And the reason that was so pivotal to me is I would have gone into a 3 month notice period. Now,
Mm.
anybody that goes into a consulting role knows that they want you to start tomorrow if you're successful. So that 3 month period would have just obviously put an end to that. And then to be honest with you, Chris, since doing that, I've never looked back. What I found during that process is that your skill set, if you want it to, skyrockets. You see so many different business domains, so many different setups, deployments, architectures, different people across different stints. You may be doing very small gigs of a couple of days or part-time hours, and you may be doing gigs of 3, 6, 9, 12 months. So really, at least for me, that enabled me to become even more well-rounded, gain more skills in such a short space of time.
Got it. Um, and the last question here before we kind of more about the professional journey before we dive into like the core competencies of data and what you're seeing now. But going out on your own and becoming a consultant, and then starting your own shop, like that's also there's a lot of other things that go into that, right? So from a skill level, also just like wearing tons of hats, you're essentially an entrepreneur. You're basically taking on a founder role at that point to become a business owner, right? Doesn't matter what kind of business it is, but just the fact of becoming a business owner has its own set of logistical challenges. And so what were some of those things that you had to go through that, again, maybe, skills, experiences, activities that you had to pick up on the fly that you didn't expect were going to be part of your journey, because obviously you're so focused on delivering value to the customer or the client, but you have to be able to follow the formation and the legalities and the financial implications of actually running the business at the same time.
Absolutely. And to be honest with you, the list is endless. So obviously we run a services business, which is very different to SaaS or product or
Yeah.
anything from that perspective. And you think about finance, you think about HR, you think about marketing, the administration, etc. There's so many different areas of a business that, again, you just have to, at least from my perspective, I have to learn, right? It's okay. This is the next journey to go on. I need to grow, scale this business. One of the reasons that we actually moved into this model as opposed to being a single consultant is, again, because there's a ceiling, right? I have X amount of hours that I can bill, and I have a billable amount that hopefully continues to go up, but there's a ceiling. So the next phase is where we are now. And I think that probably one of the key learnings for me, because I, as a founder, as a CEO, like to be aware of what happens in each of these different domains and at least have some knowledge of how those departments are run. And then something that was key for me was being able to hand off. Okay, find people, put frameworks in place, and let them own and run with it. That's probably been one of my biggest learnings going into this model, and also cash flow for any founder, executive. Cash flow is such a difficult balancing act, and especially when you look at some of the economic factors that we've had in recent years, with COVID, lockdown, pullback, for Brexit, etc. in the UK. So it's been a very interesting journey there, Chris. And I'm sorry I haven't really been able to focus in on one point, because I really am trying to be honest when I say this. It's all encompassing. There's no area that's untouched.
Absolutely. I 1000% agree. Very cool. Thanks for sharing a little bit more about the visibility into your experiences of running that. Let's dive into, what you focus on right now, right? Which is like looking at different businesses, looking at where they are from, a data perspective and how they can leverage that data for improving a plethora of things, right? And it's in addition to just top line revenue, but like what are some of these things that you're looking at, or what are maybe like the majority of the use cases that you tend to see, if any, or are there like 2 to 3 buckets that you typically see where a company is coming to you where, look, we have all these data and this is what we would like to do with it? Or is it like, we have all this data, tell us what we can do with it? And where do they typically fall into in terms of what they're doing with it?
It really is a combination. We're really fortunate because we are a fairly small consultancy. We're not obviously one of the big four providers globally. And so what we see and what we offer is we start at the top, and this is really at the executive level of driving strategy. So partnering with organizations and understanding what they want to achieve as a business, and then identifying projects and plans of how they can use data and AI technologies, whether it's by department or whether there's a pilot or a POC that can be run to really drive those key areas. It could be to increase net profit by 5%, to infiltrate new markets, or to reduce or to make a pipeline more efficient, for example. So that really puts us at the top and delivering a strategy and a roadmap that organizations can then follow through. Then, as a team of consultants, we're able to then execute, if need be, for these organizations as well. And that means that we put individuals on the ground, so to speak, to then go and deliver and then train the organization on these new technologies as well. So that's the bottom rung, as we also offer training on these different technologies. So it gives us a unique approach because we can do a top-down approach, but we can also do a bottom-up approach, whereby if you just need training, if you just need execution, before going into that detailed strategy, then we're able to achieve that. Now, for a lot of organizations that reach out to us, sometimes they don't fit into any of those buckets. They have an issue with their existing systems, and that can grow into, so for one of our clients, it grew into a new revenue vertical for them. They were building out a platform on their data that they didn't know was possible. And now this has become a revenue vertical for them. And then you start to go into the strategy aspects. So again, we're very different because we're very wide in terms of our client base.
Got it. And obviously I think like when we're talking about data, like it's so many things have just kind of like from a tech perspective and from just like a SaaS and from, I think, like, a database side of things, like everything's kind of like grown so fast, right? We're talking about internet's only like, what, 25 some years old, 30 years old, right? From a commercial perspective. And then we're talking about all these other things, from like migrating from on-prem to like into the cloud. And that's still, I think, even though that becomes now common language, it's still something where you still have, I think, like 70% of companies that are still on-prem and have not migrated yet. That being said, like within such a like fast changing landscape, I think about data and I think about like the infrastructure to actually capture data efficiently is kind of like the start of it all, right? Like, well, first, before maybe that is, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit better, but like, how should an organization that is starting, say, today, think about data? Like, what should they be prioritizing? Is it the infrastructure? Is it what kind of data they should be accumulating? Should it be working backwards from like, how do we want to leverage data ultimately? And then figuring out and starting from that point to go backwards into it. But talk us through what you think and what would you suggest to companies today?
Absolutely. I always use one word, and I say that you should be approaching data and AI strategically. Okay. Now, with the business objectives in mind, you can have a small plan or a small project, and you say, yes, we're going to focus on data quality. That's excellent. The data capture, we're ensuring that my name, Leon, is not spelled 3 different ways in your database. That's absolutely perfect. But then the question becomes why? And then you ask why another 4 times to answer that 5 why framework as well. Now, if you start with why to begin with, and usually organizations, at least those that are run well, in my opinion, have business objectives that they're trying to achieve either quarterly, annually, et cetera, et cetera. Now, by aligning your data initiatives to those objectives, it gives you a really clean runway of how you can utilize data. The 4 different frameworks that you need. So this is governance, management, like I mentioned before, strategy, and then you need to start looking at architecture, etc. You can go a bit deeper in each of those pillars. But by aligning it with your objectives, again, you have something tangible to measure. You have tasks to say, well, actually, we're going to cleanse our customer list to give us a master record for each of these individuals, because what that does is it gives us that golden record that we can then target with marketing. We're going to look at how we can potentially use some machine learning to become predictive, or maybe do a recommendation system like Amazon have, with the goal of increasing our upsell value by 5%. We're going to do a small proof of concept of this with a key selection of targeted customers in this area using these projects to prove that out. Then once we have that proof, we either fail fast and try something different, or we then build that out into a much bigger project. And I've glossed over a lot of the elements there. Obviously, it's a lot more in depth than that, but it gives you a good idea of how we would approach these type of projects.
Got it. Interesting. And how would you say maybe how have things evolved or changed where your answer may have been different 5 years ago? And then let's start there, but I'm also curious as to what you're seeing changing now and what you think your answer might be in a few years from now from the same question.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the great thing. Well, I think it's a great thing about this space is that you have organizations that adopt bleeding edge technology, which is absolutely fantastic. We need organizations like that. But then you have, like you mentioned before, those people in the middle who are just evolving from legacy tech, currently on-prem, shall we say, and then deprecating technology as well, and then looking at these newer techs maybe 5 years down the line, for example. And then you have those organizations that really are, sorry, excuse me, legacy first, and they're fairly antiquated, but we have a lot of those systems that we can't turn off, shall we say, as well. And so what this does is it gives a different approach to a different organization. You have businesses that are at different steps throughout a journey, and it means you have to tailor your approach. So we are working with industries that are bleeding edge. We have to make them aware that absolutely there are risks with adopting this type of technology. You're only one release away from a potential failure, because the releases are happening on this tech all of the time, and we've seen this. Also, there's going to be a lot of changes in legislation, compliance, biases, especially as we talk around artificial intelligence and the different branches that surround that. And so you have to paint a picture which shows the benefits of adopting this technology, but also some of the cons of being one of these early adopters as well, and put that in a palatable fashion for the organization that they can then go and make an informed decision, and that you can actually circle back to and ensure that it's still working as expected. Again, with other organizations, like you mentioned, how would we approach this a couple of years ago? Again, it's very small POCs, and I still think that this is commonplace, depending. Well, I still think this should be commonplace. Is probably the best way to approach this, and it's tangible proof of concepts, like I say, that align with business objectives. Because too often we see this with organizations that partner with third-party vendors, is you get a lot of documentation and a lot of theory around what can happen, but you don't actually get anything tangible that showcases a difference to the organization. And so I would suggest that for organizations that are maybe see legacy tech or in that middle place at the moment, is really look at how you can drive, or understand if you can drive value quickly with small targeted pilots or proof of concepts that you can build out either internally, or you can partner with an external vendor to utilize their skill set and expertise to deliver this.
Interesting. And we have this crazy changing landscape, especially now with AI and specifically generative AI, which, is only as good as the data that is the knowledge base that it's sourcing from, right? And so, how do you think about that for some of these like more legacy or larger enterprise kind of companies? And maybe this isn't directly related to your core sweet spot of like the kinds of companies that you work directly with, and maybe it's like a little bit more from, just your perspective on the environment. But um, how are these companies adopting, how are they looking at data right now as it relates to the AI play 5 years from now, right? Because I feel like that's kind of, at least from these conversations, that's where it all starts. It's like everybody's spending time on data infrastructure, especially on the enterprise level, making sure that everything is cleaned up and buttoned up so that they can add on that layer of the generative AI technology to then leverage it for for the most value ultimately. And I think it's going to be obviously an iterative cycle where it's continuously, you're still going to be learning through it from a few different iterations of it. Especially, I think companies have to house a lot of this stuff internally to actually have unique value. So how do you think companies are best tackling that right now?
Well, it's really interesting, and I'm going to go against the grain a little bit here because we see AI everywhere. We have phones that are now AI driven. We have everything. I don't need to list them out. Everything now has AI associated with it. And what I would suggest is that organizations across the globe are now rushing to tie their shoelaces with a hammer. Okay. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean that they're rushing to use the wrong tool for the wrong job.
Yeah.
Okay. It's very much FOMO out there at the moment. Everywhere is the wild, wild west. And since ChatGPT came on the scene, grandparents, children, nieces, nephews, everybody of every age demographic across the globe is using this technology. And that's really what's driving this. We've seen what I like to call the trifecta: mass adoption, mass commercialization, and mass investment in this technology. And that's why I don't believe it's going anywhere. Now, what we're probably going to see, in my opinion, is a lot of organizations that can't tie their shoelaces with a hammer for obvious reasons. Okay. Now, there are lots of tools out there, RPA, for example, generic tools like Python, SQL, etc., that can achieve what lots of these organizations potentially are looking to utilize these technologies for. And so what I would like to see organizations do is absolutely clean up their shop, okay? But do this again with a strategic roadmap in place of why you're doing it, what it relates to, how do you measure that, how can you prove that the value is being driven, how can you again prove that this is the correct technology for this use case, because often it is. Organizations are absolutely right, but I've sat in many a conversation where, and I'm not making any jokes here, this was a couple of years ago, the CFO of a large group of organizations asked how we can get ChatGPT running directly on their financial data.
Mm.
And my head blew up. But that's absolutely what's driving these conversations. FOMO, we're seeing it everywhere around us. How can we use it without thinking about any security implications, etc.? And you're very correct in what you said there, Chris. Yes, organizations should be using a private version potentially of some of these technologies. But again, we have concerns with those as well. Open source models, there's no curtails around what they can be used for. There's news stories that are breaking on a daily basis of these being used to generate illegal content as well. I won't go into the nuances of that. It's easy to Google and to see, but we've entered a bit of the wild west here, and organizations need to be aware of that and be in a position to mitigate a lot of these risks as well.
Fair enough. Very cool. I mean, we're a little bit over time, but one last question is, which you kind of already alluded to in terms of, I think we're going to go through, similar to the internet boom. There's going to, I think like AI, you're saying AI is going to be here for the mainstay, but there's going to be a series of pullbacks and learnings in that process. Is it kind of like the translation?
Absolutely. And I think if I was going to summarize it into a thought, I think particularly Gen AI, we're going to reach a ceiling, which we're probably getting quite close to, where that plateaus and the adoption tails off. I expect there to be collaboration with different technologies. So we'll start to see Gen AI go into robotics now, for example, and then we'll see a boom in that space. That's my predictions.
Interesting. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Leon, for taking the time, sharing your wealth of knowledge and your journey. That was super interesting and intriguing to hear it from your perspective, and also just your unique experience in terms of how you've gotten to where you've gotten to. So thanks so much.
Fantastic, Chris. Absolute pleasure. Thanks again.
Of course.